Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is the latest edition of the API Hangout. Today, we're going to be discovering a design-first API management with OpenAPI Specification. I am your host, Buddha, developer advocate at Tyk. And joining me today is MK, who I'll let him do the introduction of himself. So go ahead, MK. Feel free to introduce yourself.
Well, you say good morning, I say good evening, everybody. I'm MK, full name is Manket, so everybody calls me MK for short. I'm the solutions architect with Tyk. So it's been a long day for me, but I'm still really excited to see crowd coming in. It's been, as I said, it's been a year since we had our last API hangout for APAC itself. Today is a really, really interesting topic. It's very pertinent. It's OpenAPI specification.
So what do we have in the agenda for today? What we'll be covering? We're going to be starting off with a quick overview of what code first versus design first approach means. What are the sort of similarities? What are some of the differences between those two paradigms, which is kind of the core of what we're going to be talking about today. Then we go into, the main topic for today, which is going to be OpenAPI, and we're going to be doing a deep dive into this. We are going to be looking at the structure of an OAS document. We're going to be going through every single bit of it, especially the ones that are very, very important. Then we talk about a little bit on what Tyk has to offer in the world of open APIs and how we are doing things a little bit differently from the masses today. We'll look at some of the developer workflows with OAS and then dive straight into a demo, which MK is going to be presenting to you. We're going to be ending the session with a quick overview of the roadmap of things to come in the future. But more importantly, it's going to be an opportunity for you to ask your questions and let us know what you think, what you feel, what you've learned, anything that you want to know more about on this particular topic. So hopefully that sets the agenda right for everyone. And I can see there are folks joining us from all over the world right now, including Norway, Uruguay, India, Sri Lanka, which is amazing to see, Spain as well. So fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Once again, like I said, we are looking for a very lively discussion on this particular topic. Open APIs, open standards in general have been really, really an exciting space over the last few years. It's only gaining in popularity as we see more and more conferences looking at topics that are in this particular space, whether that is OAS, whether that is open telemetry. We are seeing more and more conversations happening, which is fantastic for the overall ecosystem. So let's get on with it, shall we? Let's start off with a little bit of history. So let's talk a little bit about where we are in the world of APIs and API styles. So obviously, historically, there's been a lot of, I would say, evolution of the API styles that have existed. I think REST today has become the most popular style of APIs. And this is kind of, let's see, if I take a pulse at this point, maybe about 80 to maybe 90% of all APIs written are being written in REST. Having said that, I think what has come before is also just as important. What has come before REST, things like SOAP, things like RPCs, they have their own place, they have their own importance, and we should not forget that. They had challenges associated with it, which is why REST became quite popular. And what REST brought to the table was a degree of flexibility. It brought to the table a degree of understandability, comprehension, readability of what we were creating, the kind of APIs that were being put out there, instead of being very, very verbose, as you would see with a SOAP API, for instance. The XML could be a little bit challenging to understand, to actually change. And that's where the flexibility came in, where just having the flexibility of format going from either JSON or text, you could have that flexibility of which format you wanted to choose in terms of your request and in terms of your response. It also made it very easy for you to get started, edit, and manage your APIs using any language that you wanted to, which again was a little bit of a challenge with the APIs of yesteryear, the APIs like SOAP, where you would still have a little bit of a challenge in terms of editing or changing up the overall API and what it was intended to do. So REST is awesome by itself. It has a lot of really positive things to offer, which is fantastic. Having said that, there are certain limitations as well. We do see that REST needs a bit of documentation, at least to be comprehensive well, to be understandable in the best possible way. You need to have that additional element where things are documented. It's not something that is documented out of the box. You do need to understand a little bit more about what an API does, how things work, what happens when things go wrong. All of that needs to be documented ideally. Then the other problem is that there is no standard format for request response. The flexibility brings in a little bit of challenge when it comes to lack of standardization. There's obviously best practices associated with it, but there is nothing that is usually enforced when it comes to your request responses within REST. And then finally, it is also, while it is easy to get started, it is also easy to get messed up, because you could create APIs in several different languages. You could, again, without having a standard format that is enforced, it makes it very difficult for you to not go wrong as well. Sometimes the guardrails tend to be missing. Once again, flexibility is awesome, but sometimes you do need that guardrails, especially when you're getting up and running in the early days. So I'm not touching into, say, other API styles right now, like gRPC or GraphQL, where things work a little bit differently. Things have evolved a little bit differently. I don't necessarily see them as an evolution of REST, but pretty much complementary to REST as a completely separate API style that works quite nicely, actually, hand in hand in REST. Probably a discussion for another time. With all of that in mind, what I thought we would do is we'll go into a quick overview of what design first versus code first means. These are two very important paradigms that came into existence because of varying styles, varying opportunities that we saw while developing APIs or applications in general, where one approach, which is the design first approach, took the approach of, okay, let's design things first. Let's make sure that we've got a good blueprint before we start building things. And that the idea there was to get more overall understanding on overall understanding of what APIs we were writing, as well as collaborating with other people within the organization. Whereas the other style, which is code first style, was a little bit more about getting up and running as quickly as possible, where we will code first, document a little bit later. And the emphasis here was on speed, or is on speed. So the example that we usually look at is typically when you think about design first, it's kind of like if you're building a house, you are kind of looking at building out the architectural blueprint first before you start building the house at all, which is fine, which is where, because you need to have multiple people associated with building up a house, you need everyone to be on the same page, you need to work collaboratively to be able to manage that. Whereas a code first approach is more like you're into your apartment, you're trying to decorate your apartment, and you don't really need design, you don't really need a blueprint for that to happen. It is essentially on a need-based approach, where when you need something, you're buying that, and you essentially have a plan around how that's going to be fitting into the larger narrative. If you have to really compare the two, which again, there's no right or wrong answer necessarily in this case, it really depends on what your needs are. There are 4 lenses that you can potentially look through to come to a conclusion in this case. So I thought I'll list those down as opposed to just doing a 2-column comparison between design first and code first. So the first metric to almost measure across is the ease of entry. How do you get up and running really, really quickly? So ease of entry wise, I would probably give the win to code first, because with code first, you're essentially getting up and running with coding straight away. Whatever you know, whatever you want to build, you're just going ahead and doing that. With design first, I think the ease of entry is just slightly on the lower side, simply because you do need to map out the things a little bit more holistically. You do need to think about the bigger picture a little bit more than just getting up and running and just getting started. So you do need to consider things like security. You do need to consider things like documentation. You do need to consider a lot of those things in terms of even versioning and governance before you are starting out with your application development. Now, for some, that is a good thing. The ease of entry for them is a little bit better in that case, because you have the right guardrails, you have the right overview, instead of having to code first and refactor later. But for some, you see it a little bit differently, where you're just getting up and running. Your your essential objective is to actually go ahead and go to market as quickly as possible, which brings us to the next point where we talk about time to market or time to value. In this case, again, we look at code first as, well, I wouldn't call it a winner, but I think it takes a bit of a lead here because once again, you're starting off with coding, you're starting off with building things before going into the nitty-gritties of the entire detail of the plan itself. With design first, once again, you are looking at things a little bit more holistically. Once again, arguably, thinking of it more holistically makes the time to value a little bit better. But having said that, again, you are trying to come up with a blueprint before you're going ahead and writing your code to begin with. Now, scalability is where design first really shines out, especially when we talk about larger teams where the different elements, different components need to fit in a little bit better. That's where design first really shines through, where you have this entire overview and blueprint in mind, which is something that can be shared across the organizations, shared across different teams. We are all on the same page, working collaboratively at that point of time, working to a plan which is not only covering what's happening today in the present, but also in the future, is really incredibly helpful for an organization and for teams across the organization. It gives you a really clear picture, really clear path in terms of how do you time what you're trying to do, how do you budget for things, how do you resource for things. All of that comes into the picture really in a big way when you're looking at design first when it comes to scalability. With code first, of course, there is speed which comes in, but at the same time, I think because it's speed with maybe 1-2 developers in this case, it can be a little bit of a challenge when the team starts scaling up further out into different teams or different parts of the business. The way you communicate things, because you're not documenting as you're going, ideally you should, it can be a little bit difficult for someone new to be added to the team and get up and running really quickly. So once again, scalability is where design first really shines up. And then finally, team size and maturity. If you are a completely newbie, you are a startup, you are just getting up and running, you want profitability as quickly as possible, or at least get the product to market as quickly as possible, maybe code first is the way to go, where your focus is getting those features out, getting that product out as quickly as possible. We'll think about the bigger picture. Obviously, you've thought about the bigger picture, but maybe not documented it as well as you might have wanted to. You're not looking at communicating that across multiple different teams within your startup. That is perfectly okay for you to go with code first. With a design first approach, with a team size that is a little bit larger, the teams which is a little bit more mature, design first approach again becomes very important. It becomes very useful because you're able to communicate and get everyone on the same page. So I wouldn't say there's any definitive answer necessarily here where which one is the true winner. I tend to lean a little bit more towards design first because I like having an overall blueprint of where we are going. But equally with code first, you could achieve some of those things as long as you keep in mind that you are coding first, documenting later, but you are documenting. Do not forget the documenting part of things, because it's very easy to overlook something like that in the heat of the moment where you're just going feature, and let's just build it out and ship it out. That's not the best way to go about doing it. That's where I think it exposes a bit of a vulnerability with code first. But having said that, as long as you are on the page of, we will document this later, even if we are not doing it today, we are definitely going to be documenting it, do that. I think that's where you can still make the most out of your code first approach. All right. With that, a little bit of a preamble into what we're going to be talking later on. We are obviously going for a design first approach, which is where OpenAPI specification comes in, or open APIs come in. And that's what we're going to be diving a little bit deeper into in our next section. So OAS, what does the 10,000 feet view look like? So what is OAS? OAS is a standard language agnostic interface for HTTP APIs. It is machine and human readable, and it enables you to interact with the remote services with minimal amount of implementation logic. You'll see this in action a little bit later, but you'll also see this in practice in terms of an OAS document in the next couple of slides as well. The different components of it, it just once again gives you that blueprint of what you are building, what your REST API is going to look like, and how you can actually communicate that across organizational teams. This is the industry standard led by OpenAPI initiative, which Tyk has been a part of for, well, I think right from the beginning, or at least from the early days of OpenAPI initiative. And more importantly, I think OAS is vendor neutral, where an open standard, as it should be, is vendor neutral. So there isn't anything proprietary about it. Organizations can have different implementations potentially of it, but at the core, at the heart of it, there are specific practices, there are specific conventions that need to be followed in order for you to say that you are using an open API, or an API to be an open API. The other big thing that it actually enables is integration with existing tools and code generation. This, again, gives you a huge boost in developer productivity. It gives you a huge boost in the extendability of your application and of your platforms. The way, if you have a common language that is spoken across different platforms, it becomes very, very easy to integrate those platforms together. There are systems, there are solutions that are out there that work amazingly in isolation, but they work even better when they are paired together with other components and other platforms and other tools within your own ecosystem, within your own API stack. And that's where an open standard, an open API specification in this case, enables you to achieve that in the best possible way. Ideally, in most cases, without having to consider having to build a middleware. You don't have to build out usually not a whole lot of additional logic. You have the common language that all of those platforms are speaking. It is, again, machine and human readable, so you understand exactly what to expect, when to expect it, and based off of that, you can build out those integrations in the simplest possible way. And taking it even a step forward, there are tools out there today that enable code generation based off of this blueprint. So in some cases, we spoke about how you can abstract away the implementation logic at the beginning of your design phase. That implementation logic, in some cases, if your OS document has been written well, using code generation tools, you can actually build out the implementation logic in the simplest, fastest possible way, the most efficient possible. Okay. So that hopefully gives you a bit of an overview of what that 10,000 feet view looks like. And while I'm doing this, feel free to keep your questions coming, which is going to be amazing. We'll pick up those questions towards the end of the session. And hopefully, again, looking forward to a lively discussion at the end. So let's talk a little bit about the structure of an OpenAPI document. This is OpenAPI 3.0. And there are a few different components that we've put here. Now, not every component is required or necessary. So, but these are the essential components that you have as part of your OpenAPI 3.0. If you go back a phase, if you go back to OpenAPI 2.0, there were a few other things that you would see in that as well. But with OpenAPI 3.0, a couple of those components have been combined together to make it a little bit easier to understand, a little bit less confusing, and we'll see why in the next couple of slides, and we'll see what each of these components actually enables as we go along. So, quick overview of the structure of an OpenAPI document. This is what an OpenAPI document looks like in practice. So, this is a very, very simple example of a pet store API, where, as you can see, there are a few key things that you might start noticing already. If you go back to that structure, once again, you've got your OpenAPI 3.0, which is something that is essential. You need to document the version of which OpenAPI version that you are using. You're also looking at the info section, which is a little bit more of a metadata piece. You're looking at servers, security, paths, and components. Tags and external documents are kind of extra in this case, but usually you would have your info, you have your servers, paths, and components. Security, depending on what your security style is, should be specified as well. You'll see some of those mentioned over here. You see OpenAPI, the version is 3.1 in this case. You've got your info section, which is the metadata section. You've got your servers specified, what those upstream URLs are. You've got your paths defined, along with some of the parameters, along with some of the tags that are associated with it. What happens when things go right? What happens when things go wrong? The security that goes associated with some of the specific parts as well, which you can define, like you see here in the put section of it. When you're actually changing things, you might want to have a security API key to enable you to do that. And then finally, we come to the component section. I'll go into what each section does in the next slide. But just to give you an understanding of what an OAS document looks like, the thing that you would have noticed is that this has been written using YAML. So there are two ways in which you can create an OAS document. YAML is one of them. The other way is JSON. So again, there is a degree of flexibility in the way in which you can create this. Quick overview of the structure itself. You've got your info section right at the top, which provides metadata about the API. The metadata may be used by tooling as required. I think, again, think code generation tool, think integration tools, some of the information that they would need initially to understand whether this communication, whether this integration is even possible, or is something that doesn't need to go any further. Server specifies the API server and the base URL, as you would have seen over here with this pet store HTTP bin API. You can define one or several servers, as you will see with some of the examples with Tyk later on, such as production and sandbox. You've got a security section, which talks about a declaration of which security mechanisms can be used across the API. We'll see the definition of that. Again, this is an object where you can define multiple mechanisms as well if you wanted to. You can leave this empty as well in case you want this to be a completely open API without any restriction, publicly available. You can have this empty, but if you are defining a security method, then that has to be described further under the component section as well, and in terms of your security schemes. Paths is where you define the individual endpoints, as you would have seen previously, and the HTTP methods that are supported by these endpoints. Then we go into tags, a list of tags used by the document with additional metadata. Again, tags, external docs, these are additional information that you can provide. External docs, as the name suggests, is to reference an external resource for extended documentation. We then go into components. This is essentially a very crucial element, actually, of your OAS document, because it holds a set of reusable objects for different aspects of the OAS document. It enables you to not having to rewrite the same piece of code over and over again. Think components, think smaller pieces that can be reused across your entire OAS document. So hopefully this gives you a bit of an understanding of the structure of OpenAPI 3.0. And then we head on further into what Tyk does. So Tyk is a cloud-native API management platform. It is powered by an open source API gateway, which is the heart and mind of our platform. It enables pretty much all of the different API management components that you would need, capabilities that you would need as an API manager or a creator, developer of an API. Together, we have Tyk dashboard, which enables you to have a graphic user interface that would enable you to interact with all of the different components, all the different capabilities of the Tyk gateway. And then finally, we've got a developer portal that enables you to expose those APIs for external consumption by third-party and developers. We'll see all of this in play, in action, when MK comes into his demo section as well. So what I want to talk about here is the context of Tyk and OAS brought together, where we've done a few things a little bit differently. So what we have brought to the table is we have brought the ability to take an existing OAS document, like we saw previously, and bring it and import it straight into Tyk. Tyk, on our end, we are going to be parsing it, but we are not going to be parsing it and translating it into something that is proprietary. We're going to be retaining the overall structure, the definition of OAS that we have already created, and adding a new section at the bottom of it, as you will see in the next slide, which is going to be the Tyk specific thing. So what this means is that the overall integrity of your OAS document does not change, which also means that when you're exporting your OAS document out of Tyk, then it is very easy for you to retain exactly what you have done in the OAS section and do away with the Tyk specific things that you would have done previously. So it makes it very easy for you to generate Tyk OAS from existing OAS definitions, but equally makes it very easy to maintain an OAS and Tyk OAS intelligently for exporting by different users. It helps reduce the complexity and risk of error with Tyk OAS as a single source of truth. So because you're using the same document across different aspects of your application, It means that any changes can easily trigger new things, and these can go very well into the GitOps and CI/CD pipelines. It maintains that Tyk OAS as a single source of truth that, again, makes it very easy for you to reduce the complexity, reduce the risk of errors. The simplified API design that comes into play with the editor, as you will see late in a short while, of your choice using schema validation. We've got turning existing OS APIs into running APIs in Tyk in one command. Again, you'll see a lot of these in practice shortly. It's better that you see this in action as opposed to me trying to explain this to you. But the idea here is we've tried to make it as simple as possible when it comes to building, creating, importing OS documents and adding API management, design-first approach to API management to it. This is what we have done. Essentially, if you go back to your OpenAPI 3.0 section, the key thing that you will notice is what we've got right at the bottom here, which is the Tyk API gateway component. There's a new section that we have created, which is where everything associated with Tyk, all of the API management segments that Tyk is going to enable goes here, which means that the overall integrity of your OS definition has been retained. And then the final section is about what that means for your workflows with OAS. You can look at it from across different phases, from your build phase to your deploy, test, update cycle to your publish and commit phase. With build, you have the ability to build initial Tyk OAS API definitions if you wanted with Tyk itself, or to import your OAS document that you've already created. In the deploy, test, update cycle, this is where you can keep iterating on your OAS document together with Tyk and add it to the point where you are happy to publish it. You can test it out, you can deploy it, you can update it according to what your needs and requirements are. And then finally, when you're ready to publish and commit it, you can publish it to the developer portal for external consumption. Again, OAS makes documentation really easy. That is one of the key strengths of OpenAPI specification. So API documentation is provided by OAS API documentation, or you have that available in the developer portal, but it equally makes it very easy to commit Tyk OAS definition for GitOps purposes, like I was mentioning before, because OAS and Tyk OAS together, that's making it a single source of truth that can be fed back into the overall pipeline. It can trigger things as new updates are being made, and that works very well with your existing GitOps cycle. So with that, I'm going to hand over to MK to take us through the demo part of this. Hopefully you understand a little bit more of the overview of what OAS does, what the structure looks like, what Tyk has to offer, and now you can see that in practice. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen and hand it over to MK.
Thank you, Buddha. Let me put my screen up. So I actually ran a poll while you were talking, all right, and while I'm getting the screen shared. Let me put it up full screen, put it in slideshow mode. Let me share some stats, Buddha. So code first versus design first, which side are you guys on? So we've got 4 options over here. Large majority of them design first.
By the way, the poll is not showing, by the way. So I'm just seeing the demo time.
Yeah, I'm not
Okay,
putting up the results because there are still some people voting on that. But a large majority of them go with design first, so they're on your side of the camp. Now the other half of the majority says it depends, right? And then the 2 minorities, code first. Okay, code first is getting a little bit of a lead over here. So we start with design first, it depends. Code first, coming in at 14% of today's participants, and the last group of people, you know, generally either inheriting a piece of legacy software or joining into a new team. You don't really get to choose, so that forms about 10% of our attendees today. But it's a very interesting. It's a very interesting thing. You know, running the pool itself. What it really does mean is that a lot of people are subscribing to the paradigm of design first, which doesn't OS is very important. Now, poll aside, and I think we'll have quite some time to have a casual chat around things. Demo time. Okay, so I'll talk about Tyk in a really quick summary first. Buddha introduced OS and Tyk as the cloud-native API management platform itself. But I think if you've stumbled upon us, you probably joined this webinar through following Tyk or through word of mouth itself. You probably know Tyk more as an open source API gateway. If you were to search API gateways, open source API gateways, or Tyk itself, knowing the from Gartner Magic Quadrant itself, you find us right on the Magic Quadrant as a full lifecycle API management provider here. So we're mostly more known for GitHub. We are trending at 9K stars for our open source gateway itself. But I think from a full picture perspective or bigger picture perspective, we actually provide a full lifecycle API management. So what Buddha has showed you in terms of lifecycle perspective, how the developers develop, check it in as GitOps, have it gateway, secure the API itself. We're able to do API imports based on the different standards, RESTful, OpenAPI specifications. We're also able to provide API testing, access control, security, rate limiting, and all forms of flow control. Lifecycle management in terms of versioning, deprecation, promoting between environments. And of course, lastly, we also do have a very, very popular topic, which is API consumption, develop portal, how you publish your API, how you kickstart a development program with Tyk itself. So Tyk is actually a full lifecycle API management software, but for today's perspective, we're going to focus on the one over here, which is about the OpenAPI specification. I'll skip through this one as Tyk introduction, but the one thing which I do want to point out is that Tyk being open source and battery included, because you know right over here, does mean that if you use the Tyk open source gateway itself, you get the full features of Tyk. You don't have to pay for anything, and you get the full features of the security, the OpenAPI specification, the compliance, the security patches, as well as the new version updates over there. Now, onto the demo. I'm going to show a really quick demo. It's going to take 5 minutes to set up an environment, import an API, and then we'll check on some of the OS elements and how they are translated in Tyk itself. Now, being 5 minutes, it's really very easy to set up the environment. It's very easy to follow along. So what I've included over here is 4 links for everyone to follow along. I do believe most of the people on today's session would be at least having some competence in Docker. So we're going to use Docker Desktop. So to run Tyk itself, Tyk is actually very lightweight. So I'm going to run the full Tyk Enterprise Suite on my laptop, on my PC today, right? You could see that it's not going to take up a lot of resources. The Tyk Enterprise version comes with the dashboard, which makes it easier for everybody to consume. You can also get a trial license from us. So if you go to tyk.io to sign up, you actually can get a license key within 5 minutes, and you can follow along with this demo. I have also included a link to OS repo. So we'll be using a sample OS document prepared by me today. If you go to my shortened link, it's ly OS demo. You should be able to grab a sample of GitHub as well over here. So this is my demo JSON that I'm going to use today. That's linked to a very popular well-known backend HTTP bin, which we'll use to import. And lastly, of course, we're going to use a Tyk Pro a demo setup, which is the all-in-one Docker compose file. You should be able to go to the URL, go to the shortened URL, bit.ly/tyk-pro-docker, and you should be able to git clone. Let's go to that, and then we can start to work on it. So this is the Docker Pro demo that I'm going to use today. Setting it up is very, very simple. We're going to just need Docker. We run a git clone command over here. For those who are trying to follow along, we've made it really easy. All you have to do is do a git clone to this GitHub repo over here, and of course change the directory to the clone repository over here. Right, and all you have to do is do a Docker compose up. So I'm going to clone it on my environment, on my command line. Command line is extremely boring. I won't show you command line, but I will actually run Docker compose up on my end. So Docker compose up. Okay. Okay, and all I have to do is go to localhost 3000. This is my local environment, and you will come to this dashboard screen over here. I'll need to paste in my license key. Just let me grab a key which I find. Okay, I've got my key. So key is really simple. Plug it into the UI. It's a really long string. You should get it in your email in 5 minutes, right? Press activate key, and we can actually just bootstrap Tyk. So I'm just going to say demo day 2023 demo. I'm going to use my email. My name's MK. Password. I'm going to give it a really strong password. No, it's not a very strong password for today's. Check the checkbox and then click bootstrap, right? And we're in. So the first page you see over here would be just to design your API itself. Tyk dashboard has quite a lot of components which I won't go through them today. I'll leave you guys to explore it. But for today's demo, I'm going to show you how actually you can organize your workflow with your OS workflow, right, with Tyk itself. So I do have a sample OpenAPI specification document itself. It's linked to a very popular backend called HTTP-bin. You could see that from what Buddha has shared, right? There are a sample of expanded as well. A sample of OpenAPI specification contains multiple sections, multiple components. You get the path. You also do get a schema definition as well, which I will actually show you in terms of security. What does that do for you? You do get mock responses, right? So it does actually define or scaffold how your API should behave, how your API should respond. And Tyk is able to ingest all of that to be able to create these kind of functions for you. What I'll do is I'll make it simple. I'll just copy the whole raw file in the OpenAPI specification. Very simple. And go back to my dashboard. We'll click import API because we're not designing an API from scratch. If we do design an API from scratch, it would be a blank page. It's a blank OpenAPI document file. You will actually be entertaining. You'll be actually meeting with a UI that allows you to build out your own API specs through interactive manner. We'll get into that after we import that. You will get a taste of what the API design looks like. So I'll click on importing an OpenAPI over here. Select the OpenAPI radio button and paste my OpenAPI file here. So Tyk works with OpenAPI version 2, version 3 as well. So this is version 3 format. It's automatically detected. All we have to do is then click import API. But before that, I just want to actually tap on some of the strengths of OpenAPI, which is the security schema, right? The mocking, right? As well as the authentication, right? So what I'll do today is I'll do a security middleware, which is validating the JSON schema, right? And I'll also allow access to only the defined paths. So I'll click a custom listen path because I just wanted to listen to. I want to onboard this API as a unique API. I'll just click it. Say demo API, right? So I'll tap on two of the OpenAPI definition structures, which is accept, right? As well as validate a JSON body over here. So I'll click import API, and there we go, right? So API imported, it's really simple, it's really quick over here. What you can see when you scroll down is that the authenticate is disabled for today's demo purposes. We definitely can enable that probably if we do have some 5 minutes later on. But what you can see as a result of that, everything which you can configure, caching, cores, plugins, and all that, you can see that Tyk has imported all of the endpoints over here. So from the OpenAPI document, right, you could see the multiple paths, different put, get, patch, post, delete, all of that has been imported for you. And what Tyk does is intelligently allow you to it not allow you, but intelligently inject this middleware for you. So in terms of allow list, in terms of validating a schema, we are able to do that for you. So you can, what you can do as part of the OpenAPI, development lifecycle is you actually can edit this. You actually can add middleware, you can add endpoints to that. Now that's not the main thing for today, but what you can do next is let me turn on my Postman client, which is a very, very popular API client. I will flip it up. So my gateway is going to run on port 8080. Let's just with the screen inside. Localhost 8080/demo API / perfect, right? So Tyk proxying the backend API over here. If you want a reference of that's more interactive instead of reading OpenAPI over here, you generally would also have a developer portal, right, where you host documentation either in Swagger or redoc formats. So this is what documentation hosting would look like. It's really easy. You actually can see the different kind of endpoints that you can make, a sample of that, and then you actually can see a example value of a body. Now, so I'm going to refer to some of these, right? And what you can see is like it's actually pointing towards this URL, htbin.thema.org. I'm going to hit some other API. Let's just see maybe the images API, right? So it's a get call images/jpeg. And oops, there we go. Okay, so we get a image of a leopard, cheetah. I'm not too sure about that, right? But we do get a couple of things. Images/png, right? And you probably get, yep, you get another image of very cute animal. Now, so that's Tyk in action over here. What I want to show is, of course, the security aspect of OpenAPI, right? Which is schema validation. I do have something that's pre-prepared that definitely would work. So demo API, code/form, you can see that it generates a QR code over here, right? If we were to disable the URL, you can see that Tyk would actually say that you're missing certain fields over here. If you're putting a box size that is way too large, that's defined in your OpenAPI, let's just say 1,000, you're going to get also an error that's generated from OpenAPI specification over here. So Tyk ingests the OpenAPI specification document and then enforces the parameters that need to be in place, right? So you can actually guide your users in terms of what values need to be inside over there, instead of having the user to refer to the documentation when they do need, right? So sometimes they do get a very useful feedback from the API itself. Now, that's like a really quick demo, all right? It's a quick demo in a nutshell in terms of the security capabilities, and that's not the extensive part about that. But I do hope that you guys get a sense, right, of how you actually can quickly onboard your API to Tyk itself, right? Get your OpenAPI documentation, add an API, import it, paste the values, and then click save, right? At the end of the day, you can actually do a lot of capabilities, right? Authentication, cores, caching, and all that. But I'll leave it to you guys to figure it out.
That was a good demo. I think it was yeah, it's good to understand how the import function works, and obviously the validation, I think, becoming very important, because we don't want anything rogue being added into the OS document and something that gets popped in. So it's a security issue otherwise. So the schema validation working seems to be quite good. So thank you so much for that. We are almost at time now, but we do have time for a couple of questions. If anyone has anything they would like to ask here, hopefully you've got an understanding of what OAS is all about a little bit. If you're getting started, hopefully this gives you an understanding of how you can proceed further. What are the different components of it? There are obviously many different tools that you can work with. Tyk is just one of them. Okay, we do have a question. So let's see. We've got a question from Venkatesh. Thank you so much for that, Venkatesh. How can you modify the request object body inside Tyk plugin? MK?
Okay. Well, this is a really interesting question. There are actually two factors to that. Now, out of the box, Tyk actually doesn't need the plugin to modify the request object itself. So the body, the header, and the query parameters, you actually can define transformations that you do need, right? SOAP to XML, SOAP, data masking, or these use cases, you actually can do it within Tyk natively without the need of plugins. Plugins generally would be in cases where you do have exceptional logic that you want to bolt onto Tyk itself. So firstly, you can do that within Tyk itself. You do have the middleware designer, which I could, if I do have extra time, I would actually gladly show you guys. But I'll leave it to you guys to figure out. So if you go into your API and go into the exact endpoint over there, you actually can define a header transform, body transform. You actually can, based on, I would say, request context variables, which is a more advanced topic, do advanced routing to different APIs, depending on who it is, what key, whatever API key that's being provided over here. Now, for plugins itself, you actually are able to extend Tyk with a variety of plugins based on different languages, Golang, Python, JavaScript itself. We do provide what we call the context variables that you actually can access it, and then you actually can modify it based on any custom logic that you want. So there are two ways to do it. One out of the box with Tyk, right? And secondly, if you do actually have very custom requirements, very specific industry related requirements, like let's just say very sensitive encryption logic that you need to make it into a plugin, then you actually extend Tyk to the plugin itself. So all of the payload is made available through request context variables there. So hopefully, Venkatesh, that does help you. Very welcome for you to drop me an email. Happy to help you guys.
Thank you everyone for joining. Hopefully this was a useful API Hangout. This time it was a little bit of a different format than what we usually pursue. We thought we'll actually do a little bit more of a show and tell together with the introduction and overview of OpenAPI specification as well. So hopefully it was fun. Hopefully it gave you a bit of an understanding of what the world looks like with open APIs. And if you've got questions, do feel free to reach out to us, and we'll pick that up as well. So stay tuned for our next upcoming sessions. We have a few that's coming up. Check our website for under events to be able to see those. Until next time, hopefully you have a wonderful day ahead. Hopefully you have a wonderful week ahead, and take care until next time. Cheers. Bye-bye.